Good afternoon, everyone. We're really happy to have you today at this sessions with us, which devoted to the I'm admitting people devoted to the urban resilience and approaches for urban conflict. This particular session is a part of our bigger event, Peace Week, which also coincides with 50th anniversary of our George Mason University. We're really happy to celebrate this big event with our Peace Week, which has already become a tradition for the school. But we're also really happy to present this session because we strongly believe in a school that working with local communities, working with urban communities is the key for resilience and key for addressing many conflicts, especially in our area where we live. And we're happy to have today our faculties, our students, but also a lot of representatives from different communities. So as recording actually will be showing people only one face at a time. So some reason Zoom is working this way. I would ask our participant to introduce themselves so people who see recording can see the face of the person speaking. I will start with myself. I am Professor Karina Korostelina. I done a lot of research on identity-based conflicts, and I use these ideas in international settings. But I also really love this project, which I'm doing together with Adnan and his colleague on neighborhood resilience in Washington, D.C. And this particular session is about how we address needs of communities, how we work together with them to increase resilience and address all aspects of urban violence. Arthur?
Hello, everyone. I'm Arthur Romano, and I'm an assistant faculty member at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. I'm what they call a scholar practitioner, so I've been doing community-based work for the last 20 years and focused a lot on education, community-led education processes around conflict resolution and nonviolence education, social justice education. And most of my work these days is in the US, especially in urban areas in the United States, but I've also done international work in the past and have just recently returned from a few years abroad.
Thank you very much. Afnan?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Afnan Rasheed. I serve as the Vice President for Neighborhood Associates. We are a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit that serves affordable housing communities across the country. In total, we serve about 6,000 residents from all across the Northeast corridor, and including to California. Our mission is Neighborhood Associates is to advance resident-led neighborhoods that are safe, green, healthy, just, prosperous, and of course, resilient. We really try to focus on civic engagement, and our mantra has always been, how do we help repair the breach and build this idea of public kinship? I'm really glad to be able to be joined by two of our allies, and one who's here from DC, Octavia Brown, and of course, one of our allies from Pittsburgh, Mr. George Spencer from Mad Dads. In general, we try to develop community-based programming using the input from the actual communities themselves. And I think Octavia's can touch a little bit about that. And mostly we really try to focus in on how do we build asset-based community development. In other words, touching upon the latent talents, associations, and gifts within the community themselves, and help capacity build and create that sustainable programming piece for it. We've been fortunate to help out with youth summer camps, with a whole family art program, and AmeriCorps program here in DC. And we continue to work towards in that vein. Really grateful for Karina inviting us. We worked for a couple of years, as she mentioned, on this the neighborhood resilience, like book of the project, with great support from the community.
Thank you very much. Octavia?
Can you hear me? I have a horn going off in the background. Hope it's not distracting. As soon as you call my name, that horn started going off. Hi, everyone. My name is Octavia Brown. I'm a youth programming consultant here in Washington, D.C., specifically Ward 7, 5, 7, and 8. I've been working in I've been doing community-based work since 2005. I work for one of the biggest organizations here in DC, dealing with foster care, the National Center for Children and Families. That's where the base of my experience came from. Before I left that organization, I was a parent coordinator. And so a part of my expertise lies in creating programming around youth and families, or intergenerational programming that strengthens the family bonds, bring families together, and of course, builds on the assets that the families currently have. So we build on family strengths. So I moved on into consulting on best program policies and youth programming. I'm not limited to community-based. I also officiate track and field. I put myself wherever I see there's a need in the community for kids who need to grow, who may lack the benefits of a strong family root, who may lack the ability to connect with their community as a whole. And so I work with youth and families who are in need of those resources but don't know how to access them, bridging the gap, of course, as Afnan said, building resilience, and just helping the members in our community to overcome obstacles and live healthy physical and psychological lives. And so that's a big part of what I do here in Southeast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. George?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm George Spencer. I'm the national president for Men Against Destruction, Defending Against Drugs and Social Disorder, otherwise known as Mad Dads. Mad Dads is an organization whose genesis began in Omaha, Nebraska in 1989. And it was a parental response to the growing violence problem that was sweeping the nation in the form of oftentimes gang violence that was driven by, at that time, the crack cocaine sales that were fueling economic opportunity in impoverished neighborhoods across the nation. And Mad Dad's signature program that was birthed was what we call our Neighborhood Street Patrol program. The goal of that program is to get the strong drug-free men in the community. They begin to go to what we call the hot spots in the neighborhood, and not to out-gang the gang or be a vigilante approach, but be more of a surrogate dad approach to engage the criminal element and everyone else that may be present from that perspective and that standpoint. So with that, we believe that a healthy community holds people accountable for things that oftentimes people aren't held accountable for in the neighborhood, whether that's, first of all, using illegal means in order to make a profit, but not to just hold them accountable about doing that, but to help them think about what they're doing. Because often when people are surrounded by others that are visible to them and they seem to have the nicer things that they desire, it begins to believe that, well, that's the way you acquire those things. Because we've had some generations that haven't had the model that I had in my youth. In my youth, I could see my dad and community fathers all around the block getting in their cars with their lunch bucket, going to work. And that's been a decreasing figure in many communities for a number of reasons. And so our goal is to present what we call real models in front of them and to encourage them there are other ways and to help them find those ways.
Thank you very much. So today our session is really, we see it as a forum so we will start with very brief introduction of our work of our two faculties, and me and Arthur will speak about books which related to this work, and then we open this discussion to all our guests and for our first participants to answer several questions on the roundtable, and then we will take questions and comments from guests who join us today. So I will start with slideshow. So the work which I was doing together with, again, my deep gratitude for neighborhood associates and Afnan who representing it today. It was idea, Afnan came to our school and asked if we can help to assess how community is doing, what can be done in additional. And I saw this great opportunity to not only to do research, but be engaged with communities. And we also, it was a great opportunity for our undergrad students. Through the whole project, we had 6 undergrad students and 1 PhD student engaged in research and working with communities. The key for this resilience community, which I hope we will be discussing today, is very important way how neoliberal approach discuss it. There are a lot of criticism, the idea that it shifts responsibility to local community individuals, taking it away from responsible government, that also tells that if there are some potential risks, they justify not involvement or not helping communities. And also a lot of discussions on resilience can have a negative form. But if we look deeper into the whole question of neoliberal approach, we really understand that actually there are the concept of resilience is not just shifting responsibility. It's actually empowering communities. It's actually giving opportunity for them to show that community is an agent of change. They already produce knowledge. They already have so much practices they know. So resilience is ability for communities to realize, reflect on what they're doing, but also create this inter-community ties. So this bridging capital, share ideas, and understanding that communities possess valuable skill and knowledge on dealing with crises is a very important part. And we as practitioners and academics and academics, it's our responsibility in this case to help communities to reflect. We're working with communities on reflecting rather than doing our specific research there. And this local ownership of ideas, local ownership of practices, of their capacities, it's very important part of how communities function in situation of urban conflict. And it's also given us this idea that resilience is really new approach for local government and collective well-being of communities. And disadvantaged neighborhoods can be considered as a part of conflict, because within any state we have some pockets of fragility and structural inequality affecting these particular groups. But also we understand that as open, dynamic, adaptive systems, neighborhoods actually able to alter, to change particular impact of the conflict, social economic conditions on their lives, and self-organize themselves, becoming a social actor of change, and also developing and sustaining particular practices. And this is very important, that if we recognize these indigenous capacities to deal with conflict and transfer the conflict, we really help communities to share their knowledge with others, making them an actor of a higher level, higher scale community change. So in this case, I'm speaking about resilience as a capacity to address and resist conflict, as active adaptation, but also transformation for the conflict. And the key for this particular research was idea of practices of resilience. It's activities and institutions developed by communities, maintained, sustained by communities, which help neighborhood to address a particular resilient conflict. So this four loop model of resilience was a result of this particular research. And I found 4 major loops which describe how communities develop and sustain resilience. The practices of resilience arrive from structure of conflict, but transform conflict itself. They rooted in dynamics of identity and power, but change these dynamics. They arrive from community capacities, build on them, but then transform and develop them further. And they also use external resources, but they also able to transfer and alter how these external resources are presented to the communities. And this particular research was done in 4 neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. and Arlington, together with, as I told, Neighborhood Associates Corporation. We done semi-structural interviews and phenomenological analysis, and we're working actively with communities, going to meetings, community meetings, and presentations. Very quick results. First, conflict loop. We see a lot of psychological factors, depression, hopelessness, some norms of violence which exist in community, criminal and drug community, and of course, some limited neighborhood resources, unemployment. And we found that neighborhoods in question, which we studied, develop a lot of practices of addressing poverty from community bank, garden, employment for youth, keeping youth out of streets, organizing events, trips for children, camping, sports programs, summer camps, enhancing security, collaborating with police, actively collaborating, inviting police to their meetings and giving police a space at their community to work with youth specifically, and increasing community self-esteem. Second important resource loop. There are multiple assistance programs in DC. There is also police, church, education institutions. And what we found that there were very developed practices of collaboration with police, inviting police to neighborhoods meeting, and community capacities. So social capital, social support, and collective efficacy are foundations for practices of resilience, but also they actually are developed. Communities constantly working, actively working to sustain, but also to further develop these community capacities. And we're speaking about community events and tours. Birthday cards was a very important part. A lot of people, first time receiving birthday card from community, were very positively surprised, and it's increased the feeling of the kinship with community. Collaboration with other neighborhoods. We saw a lot of sharing ideas, sharing practices, collective decision making, and participation in government. And finally, those people who that identity is so important and who has legitimacy is so important, is that those who has power, they define practice of resilience, reinforcing their power and legitimacy. And those who are excluded, they do not have right to decide what to do for community. And it was eye-opening ideas how men are excluded, how young boys are excluded, how some communities doing their best, but at the same time not realizing this exclusion patterns actually define practices. So this was the main ideas of research, which I will go quickly because I'm not sure what's going with my internet today. And so we discuss how we deal with exclusion and inclusion, how to increase legitimacy of particular groups, and a lot of work based on with Afnan came, how we start including and working, especially neighborhood associates, start really including more and more voice and voices of parents, fathers, into the work with community, which were excluded before. I'm so glad to see today both Octavia and George, who will be discussing these topics. So, and we saw how our practices actually fit Rockefeller Foundation Sustainable Cities project. Thank you. I will stop here, and I'm sorry again, something entire day going with my internet here. Thank you very much. And Arthur.
Okay, thank you, Karina. That was an excellent start and helpful for me too in just thinking about resilience in some new and different ways. Well, it's good to see you all. My name is Arthur Romano, as I mentioned, and I want to talk a bit about a project that I've been working on. So, and pieces from a book that'll be out in a few months, which is now available for order. I'll post that in there. And research that took place over a 10-year period, mostly in Hartford and New Haven, Connecticut, in very highly violence affected communities there, and with an organization called the Connecticut Center for Nonviolence that does nonviolence education, especially drawing on the legacy of Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, and other civil rights activists. And I guess to get really to a core point of how this connects to our conversation today, community-led education is I think a key and often kind of hidden part of resiliency. And when we look at the history of violence in the United States, and especially violence towards Black people in the US, we see that formal education or exclusion from formal education was a kind of key component of that violence, right? As well as obviously the theft of labor and wages over time, of which those kinds of economic inequalities and racial inequalities are still impacting our communities today very heavily. And there's another part of the story too, right? Which is that people have always resisted and been creative in taking education into their own hands. So from the periods all the way back to enslavement, underground education was a key component of how Black people resisted and supported their communities and generated resiliency. So I'm really interested, as somebody who comes from a kind of non-traditional scholarly, background. I'm a first-generation college student. My grandparents were both functionally illiterate. I'm very interested in how education happens outside of classroom walls. I'm a teacher, so I'm very interested inside of what happens inside of classroom walls as well. But this is what kind of part of what drew me to the really interesting work that the Connecticut Center for Nonviolence was doing. And there's a couple highlights here, and I'm happy to share some pieces from the books because the book is meant to be for practitioners and people in the community as well. So there's stories and tips and kind of guidance in there as well. But for this short speaking here at the beginning, I just thought I'd give a couple kind of key overall insights. One is that, one of the core components of their education that they do there around Dr. King's work is organizing around principles. And so there are these kind of 6 kind of key principles of nonviolence that the King Center uses, that they use as well, and a curriculum developed by Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who worked closely with Dr. King, that they use. And in those, I've just sent you over the principle. Those principles become a kind of way to think about how do we amplify resilience, right? How do we amplify it and strengthen it through this kind of lineage of nonviolence? And so there's a number of key principles there. I've just shared them with you. And the education then becomes a process where it's a community education model. So people come through the program, they learn the curriculum, and then people in the community, youth, police officers, clergy, teachers, activists, they then facilitate these workshops and education around the nonviolence curriculum. And so that people are trying to engage with, well, how do we then use and adapt these principles to our current environment? And one of the things that I think is interesting about principle-based education is it's not the same as rules, right? It's not like if X happens, then you do Y, right? A principle is a kind of delineates a way of looking at something, and then you have to do the work of figuring out, well, what does that mean for our situation today? So if we were to take, for example, the first principle of nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. This challenges a lot of our notions of courage today. In fact, many people think of nonviolent activism or using nonviolence in one's life as the kind of turning the other cheek and as a kind of weak approach, actually, as an accepting injustice, right? And our ideas of courage are very much gendered. We often think about men, depicted, and especially military power, as forms of kind of courage, right? So a question I like to ask when I'm teaching this material is I'll say, how many of you have ever seen a statue of a, well, first I'll ask, do you think it takes courage to give birth? And so let me just ask you that. Do you think it takes courage to give birth? So most people do.
Yes.
And how many folks have seen a statue that depicts birth in a town square or city square, right? Right? Pretty much never, right? How many of you have seen a man on a horse emerging victorious from some kind of battle as a depiction of courage, right? Very frequently. So our ideas of courage are gendered, and our ideas about the connections with courage are oftentimes, connected with violence. And so in the community setting, then people are opening up these conversations, leading these conversations. Sometimes people have formal teaching credentials. Sometimes people come from other backgrounds. These are some of the key components of this education, and then they're able to think about, well, what does courage mean in my high school? What does nonviolent courage mean at where I'm working? Another key component of Dr. King's book, and one that of Dr. King's thinking, and one of the principles is the beloved community is the framework for the future. And so I entitled the book, Building the Beloved Community One Block at a Time. And I'll just kind of close with this as another kind of example. But, the beloved community is King's kind of framework, right? It's his utopic vision for the future. It's not completely spelled out, right? But it's one in which racial stratification doesn't shape our lives, in which radical economic inequality is not acceptable, one in which investing in military and power and preparation for war at the expense of others is a kind of a recipe for disaster, and ultimately potentially laying the groundwork for annihilation on a very large scale. So that's the vision of the beloved community. But the notion is that it's the framework for the future. So how do we build that beloved community now? Right. And so how are we with each other? And when harm happens, or when there's an issue around accountability, or when we're dealing with the emotional weight of and things are really heavy, what does it mean to be in building the beloved community right now in what we're doing? And one of the pieces there, one of the insights that I learned from the educators on the ground, and that I highlight some research around, is that this is a kind of two-way, it's a double-sided coin, right? It's where, on the one hand, to imagine a better future is painful sometimes, right? Like if somebody's in war, just dealt with war, and you ask them to imagine peace, it's painful because the current existing reality is so different from that which you're imagining. And so that's part of our job as peacemakers. That's what I see from the peacemakers on the ground in Hartford and New Haven, is that you need to be able to hold that pain. And not see, if you want to talk about peace, if people are resistant to that, then there's a reason for that, right? It's that hope is one of the, is damaged when you deal with violence, especially across generations and across time, like, right, in the cases that we're talking about in cities across the United States. And so you need to hold that capacity. But on the other hand, it's also still important to be bold enough to envision what is not yet possible, to see beyond the familiar landscape of violence. And one of the things they do in the Connecticut Center for Nonviolence, one of the activities that I like, is they do this building the beloved community one block at a time activity, where they literally take physical blocks and maps of the city, and they go by block, and they say, if this block was beloved community, if it was fully actualized or in that process, what would the school look like? Would there be a school? What would the buildings look like? Would this place be kind of torn down? Would that be a park? And they literally go into kind of a mode of being kind of urban geographers and kind of activists in their thinking to reimagine the kind of that space. And so one kind of split and that I've seen in sometimes in peace building work is you'll have people who are working in the resiliency space and they really focused on what are the strengths and what are the positive futures. Then you'll have some people working in the problem solving mode and what has been broken and what are the harms of the past. But what I really see in the Connecticut Center for Nonviolence Resiliency work on the ground as community educators especially when we're talking about building the beloved community together, and this will come not as a surprise to all the people on the call who've been doing this work for a long time, is that we need to be able to hold both. If you dismiss the pain and the fact that people do lose hope, then they're not going to walk with you into that future. If you only stay in that place, then it's hard to see what's beyond what we are currently dealing with, right? And so there's a kind of bothness to this work. So I appreciate you all giving me an opportunity to share just a couple of the insights from the book, and I would be happy to share further in any kind of community settings. After like 3 or 4 years of work, I'm definitely ready to talk to people about this more, and I'm really grateful to Dr. Korostelina, my friend Karina, and inviting me to speak today.
Thank you very much. So I will give opportunity to our three guests, to participants, to address, maybe to comment on what me and Arthur was presenting, but also if you comment, and let's also consider the first question of our discussion today: how community resilience address dynamics of conflict and how it change conflict in the process. So what specifically about economic, social, other aspects of conflict are related to community resilience, urban resilience in specifics? So who would like to start? Afnan, Octavia, George, any of you? Your comments for presentation and thinking about conflict and resilience.
Sure. I think okay. I see George's mic turned off. I think he's probably the best lead to start us off on this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then thank you. Well, in listening to the presentations, which I was very impressed with, and will be doing some further study on your work. And the experience that I primarily have on the subject for the last now 16 years has been with the Mad Dads organization. And now I had some previous experience, some with some organized approaches, but this one with Mad Dads is with an organization where the people are single-minded in their purpose to engage social disorder, particularly as it relates to what tears at the fabric of the community in the form of the conflicts that lead to a lot of murders, okay? A lot of people being injured in other ways. And then of course, the terrible impact of drug abuse or drug addiction issues, which many of you have heard the term, it becomes a family disease, whether you're using the drugs or not. You're impacted by the outcomes of other family members that get caught up in that and all of the terrible things that it brings with it. And so we, to the point where I'm seeing things like building bridges and working with others, our philosophy is not that Mad Dads is some silver bullet that comes riding in on a horse to that the community is going to turn around just because Mad Dads is there. We recognize the need to work with the other commonly called stakeholders, other organizations who also has a similar or a mission that clearly aligns with our mission, or that they have a mission that's necessary to turn things around, where they may not say that, well, we exist because of violence, but where you're providing social capital, if you will, that people are in need of that fall into these other issues. And for instance, we participate in a number of a few different coalitions. And when I say we, I'm talking, I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the president of Pittsburgh chapter, as well as recently became a national president. But what takes place in Pittsburgh is common in our other chapters around the country, because we instruct everyone that, look, we need to really be a part of the community. The community includes law enforcement. A lot of times when I go to meetings, they'll say, well, it's community and law enforcement. I said, well, look, like it or not, they're in the community. They're part of the community. Now, the fact that our literature says we work with law enforcement sometimes is a rub with some people because of the historical issues that are real, that have often happened at the hands of people that are law enforcement personnel. But the example I raise with them is, well, working with them isn't condoning when they're wrong. They're to be held accountable like everybody else that we hold accountable. And I give, for instance, in Pittsburgh, which is common, you know, I'm sure not in a lot of places. When we have our major events downtown Pittsburgh, like the 4th of July or Light Up Night, and it attracts large numbers of people downtown, they tend to be platforms, if you will, for a lot of adolescent boys that kind of, that's the show off place. Right? My boys against your boys. And it was breaking out all around downtown during these events. And what I've said in public meetings, I say, well, everyone knows it goes on that lives in the area. I said, well, what the police do with Mad Dads and other groups that are similar as are down there, they stand back and see if we can handle it. Stand back. You know what? Nobody has to deal with a law enforcement person because we're there, and generally the young folks do conform, most of them. That's working with law enforcement. Now, would you rather us not be there? They are there, and their motto is law enforcement. And that means if you're resisting the order, it's only coming at you a couple of times before you're arrested, or if it's someone out of control in a uniform, then you're subject to that. Now, do you have a problem with that? No. Well, okay. You know, that's working with law enforcement. They ask us to be there so they don't have to engage our young people. That's usually who's doing that kind of thing. That's an example of working with law enforcement, for example. There's an organization here called the Neighborhood Resilience Project. Neighborhood Resilience Organization. There are chapters in other areas of the country as well. They used to be called Focus Pittsburgh, and that was Focus in other cities. They have a van that provides trauma care on the heels of murders. That's one of the big problems in communities where people often don't have health insurance. People are walking around in post-traumatic stress disorder because they're in a neighborhood where they've seen something that I didn't see in 4 years of military service. I haven't, and I still have never been present when somebody was murdered. And I've come in the aftermath, but it has never happened outside my doorstep. It's never happened in the block I live on. But there are people that they've heard the screams of people as their spirit was leaving. They're walking around with that. Children that have seen that and then go to school the next day. With a Neighborhood Resilience Project, they come around with the trauma van, and you have access to walk in that van and get counsel on the spot. It's not about insurance. You know, what other needs does your household need? So I'll retreat at this moment because I'm sure others have some things to share, but I'm just giving a few examples of working with others. When we encounter families, we can be a bridge to the Neighborhood Resilience Project, Centers for Violence, people that can give a deeper level of trauma care, if you will, than what may be available through us specifically. Although us coming into the area, into the scene, it does provide someone to hold me, someone to listen to me, someone to just stand next to me, someone that is a visible presence of they care. And that's huge in communities where these kinds of actions take place.
Thank you very much, George. I don't know if Afnan or Artur or Octavia want to add anything about conflict.
Well, it's a little off center of conflict itself. So a lot of my experience comes from trauma-informed care and working with youth who experience conflict within their community and their environment, and understanding how to work with them when they're either not dealing or having to deal with too much of external conflict or internal conflict. So in trauma-informed care and dealing with the whole child or the whole family, the first thing we try to do is identify the factors that take away from their ability to be resilient, to be healthy, and to be active in their community. Identifying conflict, specifically here in Washington, D.C., has been a struggle because a lot of the conflict is socioeconomic conflict. It is not two kids going out into the street and, you know, tussling or shooting at one another. It is families' inability to feed their children, families' inability to properly dress and care for, whether it be medical, educational, or what have you. A lot of the conflict we deal with that causes the trauma in our communities comes from the lack of. And so when you say conflict, I would like people to think of other forms of conflict. Physical conflict, yes, that's one, but there are other forms of conflict that we're dealing with. And specifically in the areas that I work with, this conflict is intangible. We can't see it. It's hard to identify, but it manifests in physical harm, either to our youngsters, our mothers, as we're seeing now the trend, no one is safe. For a while there, we were like our young Black brothers, our young sons. Now it's our young girls. Now it's our mothers. It's our grandmothers. Nobody is safe from the impact that conflict can have. And I've been working with a few task force here in the District of Columbia to understand better the impact that the socioeconomic changes have on the communities and how that translates into conflict. So one example is gentrification of certain neighborhoods here in Washington, D.C., and then the rise in burglaries in the same neighborhood that's being gentrified. That's a conflict. We don't see it, but that's somebody who is not able to adapt with the change, taking it out on the environment. Whether it be the person in the car or the car itself. And so we're seeing conflict played out in a lot of different ways, not just physical, not just with the police. A lot of the conflict I've seen recently are from people who are involved in the community, and they're going head to head like this, like, we want to come in and build this. No, you won't. You will not take from my community what we've been trying to build for the last decade and then take it and make it yours and rename it. So we're looking at a whole different type of conflict and how that is affecting the people who are already disadvantaged. And so in building resiliency, how do you even identify what it is that is impacting a person first? Yeah, go ahead.
It's wonderful. I really glad that you bring in this complexity, because in our school, and we have a lot of students, I'm just stressing for them, we teach them to understand multiple forms of conflict, including structural, economic, poverty, but also the cultural forms, including discrimination and also traumas related to it. And what I don't know if you saw again because of the internet, was very important part of the discussion with communities, exactly this form, this hopeless feeling of hopelessness sometimes. It's trauma related to limited resources. And resilience, people were helping children to, like, community maintenance people, we are helping children, talking with them and showing what could be skills, sharing information about employment. So there are a lot of things. Thank you, I really appreciate. Sorry, did I interrupt you? No,
you're good.
Okay, thank you. Afnan or Artur, do you want to add something? And also our participants, in addition to panelists, if you want to write a question or comments, please do in the chat.
Yeah, I guess absolutely. From our end, like again, with neighborhood associates, we're privileged to work with affordable housing communities across the US. And when it comes to that idea, like, how do you provide some kind of socio or economic place for stability? One of the advantages of well-maintained affordable housing is that it's an anchor within a neighborhood or a certain, like, a geographic area. Because oftentimes when a family comes into an affordable housing area, it helps stabilize them economically. There's one portion of stability, right, that you can kind of build from. And just like, I wasn't there for the history of it, but in recounting through some of the histories of the communities that we are fortunate enough to help support in a capacity building form, there's always the transition of once those points that Arthur and George were talking about of how do you see this as our kids in general, not just within my family, but within the neighborhood itself, people do start activating and they work towards these pieces. And it comes from a grassroots point up where they're working together, they're organizing, and it takes a few of those civic voices to come together and slowly others attract to it, especially when it comes from a place where you have residents and citizens that know the area, that are committed to it and have built upon that. You're not going to be able to get that from, parachuting in resources, no matter how robust they possibly are. A great case in point is two communities that we work with. One was made the headlines back in the 80s into the early 90s of being the largest open air drug market. And the other one was called Little Vietnam, both in DC, because of the amount of actual violence that was happening there, et cetera. But fast forward to where we are in the present, those communities are now vibrant with people, families coming out there, they're family friendly, people are playing and working together, et cetera. How do you go from that to this? And that was a lot of self-activation from the ground up. And we think that, at Neighborhood Associates, the thing we're always cognizant of is how do you help support community capacity to self-activate, to build those leadership structures, et cetera. And how do we take a look as a nonprofit? We have to meet certain goals. We have tedious outputs, et cetera, to go out for. But how do we use that in our advantage to say, is like, if there's an idea from the community, how do we ally with them to take that idea and either translate or transfer it to make sure there's a steady stream of funding for it? How do we get more community members actively participated? And how do we help build or support a leadership structure, learning by doing, a kind of approach to it? And that's been tremendously helpful in what we do. And as we've come along with it, like Arthur mentioned, some things like guiding principles, we've helped to listen to the communities and help develop a set of core values that the communities have adopted across the board, and then work around them to say, how do we provide better resident services and other pieces to it too. But that's really the big challenge from a nonprofit perspective of how do you support that community capacity building so that they can do more things, so they can have better conversations, so they can have that sense of self-direction, which we feel is a very big part of resilience and how we contribute towards it.
Thank you, Afnan. Artur, do you want to add something?
I'm just reflecting on what Octavia said, and that there's these conflict generating systems. And so it's not, only about individuals, and then thinking about resilience, right? And as communities try to fortify themselves and cultivate, joy and meet needs. And I think that's maybe a takeaway from this first part for me is just about, the need to have discussions about resiliency connected to organizing and to what we might call political change. When we look at some of the issues like she was mentioning, that we're talking about questions that really come down to resources. And if, in a city like DC, for example, it might be something like education, and gentrification impacts that. So there's going to be a handful of schools that are academically stronger and students get more support, and they're going to be clustered around the most wealthy neighborhoods generally. And then there's going to be, some charter schools or something that people try to get into. And then there's going to be, 500 people on the waiting list or something for that pre-K class. So, the answers to that question are about, in part about how do we make an equitable system of access for our kids, right? Like we have a lottery, but there's no social justice components in our lottery in DC. You don't get extra balls in the lottery machine if you're coming from a working class background or any other kind of criteria we might have. And so I think that drops out in sometimes in conversations about resiliency, not necessarily today, but just overall. So that's a piece that I'm kind of carrying away with me, is like the connection between resiliency and building political power and analysis. And oftentimes somehow, and maybe this is just in certain spaces, they seem to kind of float away from each other. And so that's something I get from my colleagues today, just to think about how we name and understand those connections, that power component is, not just at the neighborhood level, but around these larger issues, it's an important component of resiliency and dealing with the issues that people are having to be resilient around.
Thank you very much. And Afnan starts speaking about the community capacities, and both Arthur and Octavia spoke about the education. So my question is, further question developing on it. So what, in your work, what do you see as the most important community capacities for resilience? What capacities you work with specifically or concentrate on, and how do you see resilience can be used to further or advance these particular capacities? Because each of you concentrate on different capacities. So what would be for you the central? For example, for my work, what we were analyzing in this particular study, we saw a lot of capacity, community capacities, which were kinship capacities or coherence, which increase community efficacy to make decision, to make a change. And a lot of events were specifically organized to do it. Community birthday celebrations, self-esteem was the key. In my research, I found, and we were surprised with Afnan, right? How self-esteem was important for community, naming building after community organizer, collecting some goods and sending them to Kenya because children need some support there. There's also increasing of self-esteem, cleaning their territory, making it clean in comparison with other neighborhoods. All of these small details were adding into self-esteem, increasing in turn the efficacy of community to actually address a lot of issues. So I would love to hear from our panelists what they believe is the most important community capacity and how they work with it.
I can start.
Please.
So I do not want to offend anyone, but this is a statement that I took from a past boss of mine, and it stuck with me because it was simple, but it was powerful. It was a little hurtful. So again, I don't want to offend anybody, but my prior boss told me in a group of coworkers, you cannot build community resiliency and engagement on fried chicken and gift cards. And this was due to the fact that a lot of the resources at the time, or the people coming into our communities at the time, they seemed nice. They were hosting these big, come get this free stuff and come read these pamphlets while you get this free stuff. And the message was truly missed. So we had many an opportunity to really embrace and share with our community a block of knowledge that could shoot them to the moon. And it was missed because you presented it in a nice little pamphlet underneath all of these free giveaways. And so the message was missed. And so my goal, my wish for my community in building capacity is pulling from the talents of the people who I serve. You are your own asset. Once you've identified in your community that something or someone is an asset, you have to start building around that and create the building blocks. Whether you're helping a family see that they have a strength that they can share with their community, that builds capacity. If you have a dad and he's the only dad on the whole block, put together a football team and have him coach it. Like, organizing around our assets builds those capacities that we are missing from our communities. And a lot of times we miss those opportunities for capacity building because people simply just want to come in and say they did something good. So nice workshop, nice community day, nice coat drive, nice Christmas distribution. But what message did you actually leave with the community that you're trying to help? Too often we see this happen in lower where people don't make as much money. I'm moving away from the language of calling people poor or under the poverty line. No, we are economically disadvantaged, and some of it is purposeful. So I'm trying to, like, when I talk to my residents, I want them to understand that you can build capacity in yourself. These are the resources. DC has a plethora of resources. This is how you use that resource. This is A, B, C, and D. What we find in our community is not people who aren't passionate about change or capacity building or asset building. They don't know the first step to doing it. And so they go to these workshops, these community events in hopes of gaining this knowledge. And what they walk away with is a goodie bag. That's the mindset that I'm working to change with the colleagues that I'm working with, my local ANCs, the DC Commission, Small Business Association, DCRA. I don't know people, anyone who works in the District of Columbia is, you are aware now that DCRA, which is the governing body over businesses in DC, has now gotten involved with the nonprofit arm of DC, so that organizations are more transparent in the work that they do, because they too have identified this as an issue, not necessarily a problem, where people with the resources come in and they give it to you, but they don't present it in a way that's helpful, or they don't present it in a way that's impactful enough that you take that message and then you then go share it with other people. So in building capacity in my community and building resilience, I share with people the policies that are shaping DC right now. I just spoke to a resident the other day, hey, I was on a task force about the water valve replacement. Something simple like water valve. Yeah, did you know they're going to turn off the water for almost 500 residents for up to 12 hours? And you're like, no, I didn't know this. This is how we build capacity. We build capacity by sharing knowledge, making everyone knowledgeable of what's going on. If they want to make a change in their community, it's not dumbing it down. I simply get where they are. I meet them where they're at, and I break it down step by step what you need to do, whether it's writing a letter, call Eleanor Holmes Norton office, call this person representative, call the representative for Ward 8. If I've got a contact who I know is responsive to the community, I share it so that people, when they want to do things for their community, they know who to call, they know where to go, because the knowledge to me is what's missing in order for us to build the capacity that's needed to generate healthy communities. And so, like, again, we could talk around it all day and say, hey, well, we're doing this, but if the community is not receiving your message the way they need to receive it, you're not helping at all. So again, I didn't mean to offend anyone with the chicken.
Thank you very much. It's exactly. I don't think I offended anyone. Everyone completely agree with you. You are not bringing free stuff and telling, okay, you are not given a fish. You teach to fish, right?
All right. Yes.
No.
Okay.
I think like the feeling of like, how do you build community capacity, and where do you start from that? If you're again, like I'm not living exactly inside the communities that that I'm serving and working alongside. One of the biggest things to kind of remember is like a principle check, right? The first thing for us from a nonprofit standpoint, I feel, is to say, it's like taking a step back and say, has the community invited you, and have you built a track record of support with them? And how do you make these mutual learning opportunities, right? Where you have the transference of knowledge and skills and work towards more of a shared vision of what that is. And that takes dialogue, it takes understanding, and then small steps for trust building as well, too. So when I first started at Neighborhood Associates, prior to that, I was an AmeriCorps Vista member, and then I used to work on campaigns. And to Arthur's point of the idea of what's the connection between capacity building and social capital, and then the idea of political power, we'd see these high points of perfectly organized individuals when it was, hey, we need to get somebody else in power, like right now. but then what happens for the day-to-day life afterwards, right? And then as I got to learn more about our coming to neighborhood associates, we wanted to make sure we started off with a place where it says like, okay, what's something that we can work together with so we can learn how we work with one another and how we help to build some of those transfer of skills. And then that helped inform us to say, what kind of programming would we want to provide? So we didn't want to do the same thing of saying like, okay, what is the incentive to do something collaboratively, or is the incentive something that you can just take home as like a one-off, like, a giveaway? With these conversations and learning, it's how we kind of develop some of these programs, like the one that Octavia helps develop of family art. It was, how do we take something of mutual interest and for families that may have not engaged with one another to do something collective and to think about their community, their neighborhood, what their aspirations are. That kind of helps build that bridge, a little bit of trust and familiarity so then they can do the next thing. The similar approaches and how we came up with this, the youth summer camps. That was something, people have told us a lot of times, like, why don't you guys just raise a bunch of money and send the kids off somewhere else, with the glitz and the glamour. And the research that you had provided was like, no, actually, residents take a lot of pride that they have something locally that they've built that's reliable and sustainable. That's better to kind of build off of that bridge and see where that goes. Because as you're doing that, you're activating the set of parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles and siblings that are supporting this program from the ground up through volunteerism, through recruiting, through management, through word of mouth. And that builds some credibility. And it's like, okay, let's find the resources to help build that up and create different avenues so that's sustained over time. And one of the greatest things is to help kind of provide a sense of local history, again, with affordable housing as a local anchor, is the communities that we were in. A lot of the community centers are named after the actual locally civically engaged leaders that helped preserve those historic buildings, right? The Chauncey Spruill Center in Paradise at Parkside, the Patsy H. Hartsfield Center at Carver Terrace, right? Why are these names so important? It's because everyone that sees them inside that block, inside that neighborhood, knows that that building is named after somebody that came from the ranks of the community itself and accomplished something that was nearly impossible. We can honor that as we go along. So it's a different mindset when you're trying to build that community capacity. You can't do the work for other people. What you can do is listen. What you can do is work alongside and see exactly where people are at, and then try to say, like, what can we do next in a systemic way to build that, to make sure that as you go along, it's not just like, oh, well, you have no funding, this is completely gone, right? It takes a little bit more time and patience, but we feel that the long run approach to it is much, much better. And one of the most recent things that we've done is, our president, Dr. Austin, started this new approach from its old work called public kinship. It's literally just the idea that see your neighbor as you see yourself, but don't impose a program. Share a set of ideas that people can build off of, and then local civically engaged residents can then take that and work on it. And so we came up with a reflection journal and a calendar, and Bobby has a TEDx talk. I'll drop it to the chat box. And we started working with our allied communities to say, here's a general guide. What would you like to do with it? And how can you affect that, right? Because what we realize is that to reach 100 people, you need maybe about 3 people that are really committed there on the ground to do these things. And how do you leverage that? So that's kind of our perspective from the nonprofit angle of how do you really help engage and build community capacity for the bridging capital and social capital from the ground up, and transfer that into programs, et cetera. Sorry if I went over a little bit, but that's kind of the approach that we try to take at Neighborhood Associates, and it's informed every single day by the work that George does and shares with us, conversations with Octavius, and of course his Resilience Project.
Thank you very much, George. George, you muted.
I'm glad I was coughing initially, so I'm glad I was. But yeah, there was something Octavius mentioned that I'd like to dovetail a little bit about the individuals in the community being assets. And I think that it's extremely important that people begin to see themselves that way, that historically it had not been presented that way to people in impoverished communities or economically disadvantaged communities or what have you, that have a number of issues within the community that largely often stem from that, those facts. What I've seen that seems to work well within the Mad Dads organization is our motto is, we have to be the force behind the change. You know, Superman isn't going to fly in and all of a sudden, you know, there's going to be these sweeping changes. We have to be the force behind the change. So we collectively around us pulling together. And I'll start with just looking at us internally as an organization. There are members that are, my best friend had joined Mad Dads. At one time, he was the chief probation officer for the federal courts, okay? There's another gentleman that's an attorney. He's a Stop the Violence coordinator for the city of Pittsburgh. I have other members that are unemployed themselves, okay, or in between jobs right now, you know, and everything in between. There are individuals that are former military, and there are people that would never join the military, okay? But in the mission of Mad Dads, it's like, I see something that I want to be a part of because I can see it as being something I can contribute to. I can be a part of this with what they're asking me to do. And then, as I mentioned earlier about us being involved with some coalitions, well, within the coalition, just as individuals, you and I can do together, what neither of us can do alone, so it is also with organizations that our focus is pretty focused on, hey, look, somebody needs to engage Joey across the street because we're watching him, you know, he's not going to make it if somebody doesn't get his hand on him right now, okay? Or there is a need. We've got appeals from schools all around the Pittsburgh area. They're out of control during the school day. Can you come and just be present to deter what's going on in the hallway? I mean, this is in real time, this problem, and after school, it moves here, here, and here. Well, that's pretty much what we've purposed to engage, not losing sight of the other things that have been mentioned here. But in the coalition, then there's strength with those that are leaning more into maybe another area of the problem. And collectively, the resources coming together, even in the form of some of our members that have some of these other skill sets, education or what have you. Hey, look, this is how you accomplish that. And well, okay, maybe Mad Dads doesn't do that, but a Mad Dads member that has that background is our representative on that coalition. Hey, they're trying to do this and that, I got you. And they're the person that represents us in that forum. But the goal being bringing the community together in the effort. You know, that it's not quote unquote any specific necessarily or organization, but we are coming together collectively to address, when you start talking about these structural issues, you know, and the forces, if you will, that have created things that have presented barriers to people from being empowered to overcome, you know, their plight. Plight being whatever framework that's built around that in the form of housing, employment, healthcare, and on.
Okay, thank you very much, Arthur. And I also want to encourage all our participants to write questions to panelists.
Yeah,
Sorry,
this is
Arthur.
a perfect time. That's a perfect time for that, actually. Yeah, I mean, just to answer your question, you know, directly, I think, Karina, I think of what's at the core of my work and what I learned from the community members that I work with is that, you know, oftentimes we have assumptions about people who experience violence, people who experience poverty, people who are in positions in our society where they may not have access to higher education, other things. We make assumptions about what they need, of course, and other people have talked about that. But we also make assumptions that around that they're not thinking about these issues, or that they don't have valuable knowledge around those issues. This is one of the things I really take from Viktor Frankl's work on Man's Search for Meaning, where he looks at, even in the Holocaust, how people who were in camps some people were, how they were making meaning in those circumstances. And I think when, people look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they see food, water, shelter, all the stuff at the base, no doubt if you are lacking in those things, it disrupts an ability to do other things, right? But on the other hand, even people who are experiencing oppression are asking questions and thinking about why is this happening to me and to my people and to my community. And we have huge voluminous research to show that, and lived experiences and poetry and art to show that. That's how people survive. They survive in that questioning, in that hoping, in passing that through the music and the art, and passing that through our networks of education that many times, like I was saying, are outside of our schools. So I would say for me, it's then the question is, and not only is it that they're asking questions, but that they have specialized knowledge that people like myself, for example, like a white male urban academic, even though I come from a working class background in my own life, just don't know, right? Because the experience is different, right? And so building those connections across those lines of difference, and really finding, then the question becomes, how do we amplify and support that knowledge, and highlight and lift up folks at the community level as educators, as knowledge producers, and give them a chance and create opportunities for teaching. And so in the Connecticut Center for Nonviolence example, I'm looking at one program over a 10-year period, but over one program that does that teaches a specific kind of curriculum, hands it over to community members, they adapt it, they teach in a variety of different settings. And sometimes that teacher looks like a 13-year-old kid who was, who's been at risk and has been in trouble and stuff, right? Sometimes that teacher looks like an 80-year-old elder, who's done all kinds of different things in the community. But I think it's just an area that's easy to miss about, because this just sounds so, oh yeah, of course, right? But in fact, education is very exclusionary oftentimes. And we do have ideas about who has valuable knowledge and who should be teachers and who shouldn't be teachers, and what could, and what I am not saying that formal education doesn't matter. I think it does matter a lot. And I think that formal education should be more tightly tied to community knowledge, to there's knowledge at the barbershop. There's a pedagogy and a way of teaching at the barbershop and the hair salon, and there's at the community faith in spaces by artists. There's knowledge being generated and passed on in those spaces. So a kind of thought that I have that didn't kind of have, I ran out of pages for the book, but that I think about is, we talk about wraparound services for schools, which I think is really helpful, right? Bring in support for kids that need nutritional support, that might need other forms of support, and connect it, make the school really like a town square, right? And I think we've only touched the surface of that. But on the other hand, I think we should ask the reverse question, which is how do people learn outside the school? And what's the pedagogy of those other spaces, the barbershop, the church, the drum circle, all different kinds of places? And how do we invite that in? Because what I noticed in the book is, I say to the young people, and to people from other backgrounds, but in this case, because it's about school, I say to the young people, why are you doing this? You're at the library at 6:30 at night, learning about Martin Luther King and Ella Baker and elders from the way past. And, and part of what they say is they actually talking about things about violence, about inequality, about these things that we don't get to talk about at school. And I said, well, they certainly talk about Martin Luther King at school, right? And like, not like this, you know? It's like, I have a dream and, you know, and a celebration, and nothing about like what King talked about, like the you know, triple evils of racism, militarism, and economic exploitation. That's just not there a lot of the time. You know, hit a kind of definitions of understanding where King, you know, is really challenging, and the many women who were involved in that movement who were, you know, made it happen. So I think that that's just, for me, in closing, the core piece I would say is that I think for me as somebody in the university, I want to see funding, I want to see recognition, I want to see support for our community educators, and I want to see a kind of transition in our thinking about formal education, especially in communities that are dealing with these issues, to find ways to sustain those educators and really mesh more our formal education with our informal education.
Thank you very much, Arthur. So we have a few minutes left. So I would like to really finish with something very feel-good type of. And if I will ask all our panelists in 2 minutes to share one feel-good or one I'm proud of moment. How your work in community, you really believe brought a change to community. And I will just start with something which Afnan probably will steal from Afnan, but what we deal with research together really revealed exclusion of voice, exclusion of their voices, exclusion them from the community, and they were really left behind because majority of resilience practices were designed, organized, and led by mostly older women. So who probably wanted to include young boys but didn't know how. They proposed activities, but boys were not interested in. Like then they're not interested in bake sales or something like that. So the idea then we founded actually neighborhood associates were working with multiple organizations, and he probably can build on it or bring his own story. We're able to actually design programs which were inclusive of young men and something which make the community become meaningful for them. They will start feeling themselves as a part of their community, beloved community, speaking how Arthur was telling. This is my short story. Who would like? Yes, please, please.
So it was about 3 years ago. We actually created a small program called The Eye, which is Empowering Youth Enterprise, which was a boys program, which we hosted two to three TED Talks, where we had young boys and we invited young females to come in and share the teenage experience. We've talked about several topics: sex, education, money, and the dynamics of power and their perception of it. I'm a Girl Scout troop leader. I noticed you had that. It was one of your assets. We turned that around into a way to include our brothers. So girls who had brothers, we invited them to the Girl Scout meetings. We invited them to the camping trips because we also saw that there was a lack of male interaction as far as young boys and young adolescents and young adults went. We also saw that when we did have their attention, we were women standing at the front of the room. And we felt like as mothers, as women, and community members, that they didn't want to see us. They didn't need to hear from us. They needed to hear from their perspective 10 years, 20 years down the road. One way that we've been able to combat that is at St. Luke's Church, which is a Catholic church, a staple here in Ward 7. They have what they host is a family day. And you could come down and do art and listen to the guest speakers. And they bring down the most powerful guest speakers. And so one of them was a convicted felon. He served 18 years. He comes down every year and he talks to boys ages 8 to 18 about how not turning his life around, but understanding that his experience made him who he was. And so, yes, you can go to prison. So things like that. So those are ways that we are trying to change that dynamic is by putting in front of our young boys, people who either you're going to end up like that, but if you see it now, you can change your direction. Like trying to give them a glimpse into the future and make them the expertise of the talk. because they have insight. And so I will continue with my program, Empowering Youth Enterprise, just to put our young men at the forefront of the conversation going forward. Because I do a lot of girly stuff, I do. But we do want to bring our boys and our young men. And I'm a mother of 3 young men. So definitely, I saw it as important to include them in everything I did. And that included Girl Scouts.
Thank you. Wonderful. So wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I'll dovetail that with I'll just share a little bit about the journey, I'll call it, of the Pittsburgh chapter in particular of Mad Dads. I'm the founder, one of the founders of the chapter. And that project started in September of 2004, and it took 18 months to become a certified Mad Dads chapter. There's some prerequisites to meet. It took us that long to do that. And from that, you know, I'm finding Mad Dads to be something that has a mission that we haven't seen large numbers of people gravitate to do our signature program, which is on the streets, frankly speaking. And we're all volunteers. We don't have an employee in the organization here in Pittsburgh as I speak. I'm not saying that's always the way it's going to be. That's the way it is right now. But we looked at it from the standpoint of, you know, somebody doesn't have to give me a check to go get my son out of the combat zone. It's just that simple. My dad would come down there in my day, and my brothers and I knew he could show up anywhere because he loved us that much. And that's what this is about. Are you brokenhearted enough to go get our son, daughter, whatever, out of the drama of the streets when we know they're there? It's as simple as that. And I read a study in the early years that had been done in the mid-90s about organizations who are singularly focused about street level crime. And most of them did not make it to 5 years because people burn out. And that's probably maybe number one reason. And it's hard to see success when you're surrounded by that level of that exists in some communities. We're in our 16th year. We've stuck to this. We are called upon from all sectors of the community to be a presence, okay, in those situations. And we're growing, we're not decreasing, it's increasing. NAC, I want to thank for their part in empowering us, because it's often difficult for people that have resources that when you can't present statistics that say the numbers went from here to here, and that's their idea of success versus we got this one out, or we were a part of, not we did it, but we were a part of a linkage, the bridge to somebody out of that into a better way, and to have that feedback from the individuals that we so impacted that way. I'll close with this. Weed and Seed, when we started, was an integral part of what was available to communities in the years when we started. And one of the things they liked about Mad Dads was, out of the community groups that were part of it, they liked the fact you stopped something. Key thing, you stopped something. And because of that, we would get extra resources we weren't even asking for. He's like, these people stop stuff. Let's help empower them. What could they do with a little more resources? We started a scholarship a couple of years ago in honor of my late wife, frankly speaking. It's a memorial scholarship. We gave 2 last year. This year we're giving 4. And the vision is within the next couple of years, we'll be giving at least 8, and we'll stick with all of them through the whole 4 years, not scholarships the first year. And to continue that to infinity. Same thing with mentoring. We hadn't been the mentoring program in-house, but we started one this year. Started with 5 boys, not 50. Those 5 are really liking the pilot that we got going on. We're going to say, well, you need to be a part of the next 5 that are going to be younger than you to be a peer counselor. And we're looking at that, the same thing that's happened for the 16 years with the chapter, that these things would be seeds planted that grow. and they'll grow regardless to who else from a government structure gives us anything. We're raising that money from within the fabric of the community, and we do appreciate resources from anywhere. So I don't want to make it sound like we don't get them, but we don't lean on them.
Thank you, George. Arthur and Afnan, very quickly, your most successful story.
I just say it's just, for me, it's very meaningful whenever, in terms of the work that I've been talking about, whenever you see community educators that have gone through nonviolence training. I mean, this is mostly the work of the director, Victoria Kriskow, who started that work and the shared leadership that they do. But, you know, community members who are then going on and doing additional nonviolence trainings with, you know, teachers and police and younger kids and all that. That's always very meaningful. And then I really enjoy when I can bring community educators into my classes or to the university. So we've done that. The folks who have been involved with Connecticut Center, the young folks, came to Washington, D.C., came to the mall, visited MLK Memorial, and then came to George Mason University. And we had a group of our master's students and PhD students from conflict affected areas all over the world talking about the work they do at the grassroots level in Hartford and New Haven, and issues that people are dealing with all over the world. And so there's definitely a piece of my own individual heart that sees the international piece of this work and the connections for us global peacemakers. And so when those moments where we can bring folks together and I can be part of that bridge is really meaningful for me.
Wonderful, thank you. Afnan?
Yeah, I guess the thing that I'm most proud of for Neighborhood Associates is over the last course of like 6 years, this resilience project and the other programs that we helped develop, is that we can really say that we walked alongside the community members that we worked with every step of the way. There was not a hierarchy there at all. And that, you know, through the time that we've had there, we're able to start seeing like the way we felt about communities and they felt about us. We're able to see that the next steps of how they're kind of growing. One of the greatest things is we talked about the family art program. In Louisville, we were able to work with a great teaching artist, and these families came together, and those families organically formed their own civic group that's still working today. Again, just like George said, it's a couple of people together, but it's one more piece of how you get that real sense of resilience, right? Of people coming together, activating, working together, finding out what their common aspirations are, finding and how to push that forward. So that's like one great example of what I think like a personal accomplishment and an organizational accomplishment is, and kind of like frames what we'd like to do and are continuing to kind of do as we move forward for this piece. And that it's not just like a Neighborhood Associates did this thing. We can honestly say and proudly say it was a coalition where different organizations, people came together to do something that was like good. And the other thing we're really proud of is that we're not focusing on a single issue or an output or an outcome. We really are working towards how do we have a sense of a more qualitative outcome? Does the community feel more inspired? Do people feel like they've built leadership skills from at the community like level, right? That we can support however we can. Can we plug in a horizontal integration versus like this weird vertical kind of integration that businesses are obsessed about? That's something that's tremendously important to me as a first generation American born here, you know, a person of color, and then someone who has responsibility of working in a nonprofit space. How do we do that and how do we share it? And we're really proud of the fact that the work that we're able to do here, we're able to share with other organizations that have far greater capacity and resources and that approach. That's something that's really meaningful for us, and we hope to continue. We'll never shy away from that at all. So thank you for having us, and thanks for partnering with us and allying with us well too. Karina, Octavius, and of course, Mr. Spencer too.
Thank you very much. We over time, I really appreciate, first of all, you coming here, speaking about your wonderful work. And thank you for your work. Thank you for each of you. It's wonderful to hear. We will continue working. Our school is deeply devoted as Arthur for international work. I myself from Ukraine, so you know what I'm going on right now through, and I'm deeply engaged. Probably my internet not working well because already.
Well, I'll finish what Karina was saying. Thank you all, and thank you for everybody who attended. today, for making the time, and for our presenters for sharing. And we'll see you. Keep in mind, Peace Week, we have got a ton of free events each year, and it happens just around this time. So check out the Carter School too if you haven't already, and come visit us sometime. We always enjoy having new folks and new ideas at the school. Take care.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you for helping. And thank you again, everyone.